Hello and welcome to the Miko Bits show, and I'm your host, Miko Bits, and today we have an exciting guest, which is Jeffrey Zerlin from Axie Infinity, which is a very exciting non-fungible token game. So it's a blockchain game, and it involves effectively sort of pet and creature battling scenario. So it has kind of a genetic heritage, kind of in the Pokemon type family, and it's very, very popular. So it's exciting, popular, and really looking forward to hearing from Jeffrey. Before we get into it, just note that this is a information and entertainment show. It's not intended to be investment advice. So that's just, as always, seek a licensed professional for investment advice. So I guess without further ado, here's Jeffrey. Hey.
Hey, Miko. Thanks for the invite. Really excited to be here.
Yeah, fantastic. I guess first things first, there may be people in the audience that haven't heard of Axie Infinity that maybe have been living in a cave. So, for people like that, maybe you can help them understand Axie.
Sure. So Axie is a movement disguised as a digital pet game. So the game itself centers and revolves around battling, collecting these kind of adorable monsters called Axies. I think the secret sauce is that we carefully structure the economy and basically using blockchain, which allows our players to earn crypto by playing. So it's kind of, there's been this phenomena around this concept of play to earn, where people are feeding their families during the pandemic and playing Axie Infinity. I think that's kind of what's made us kind of what's helped us make a name for ourselves so far. And we've also seen Axies become a very highly coveted collector's item, with some Axies selling for hundreds of thousands of dollars. So.
Yeah, we had a guest, Gabby, who is the CEO of YGG, or Yield Guild Gaming, which is a guild that's mostly dedicated to playing Axie. And it's mostly dedicated to playing it on the play to earn basis. So the membership is mostly in the Philippines and in Indonesia, and people there are earning hundreds of dollars a week playing Axie Infinity, and they're definitely doing what you described. They're feeding their families, and it's a bit like driving an Uber, only you're not actually driving a physical object, you're driving virtual objects. So that's kind of a fun twist. Tell me about the sort of the gameplay. Tell us, like, if for someone who hasn't checked it out, what's the draw for the game?
So the idea behind Axie is that it's not just one game. It's going to be an entire universe of games. What we currently have out is a card battling game. It's kind of similar. It's not actually similar to anything, but you can kind of play different cards. Each Axie has 6 different body parts, and those body parts actually correspond to different cards. So the battles are 3v3. You can battle against other players, which in real time. There's a leaderboard with rewards. We've given out things like Aave tokens, Kyber network tokens, real gold in the form of gold-backed tokens from Digix, and also our governance token, which basically is kind of a slice or part of our universe. So we also have have a land system under development, which will basically allow you to build a kingdom for these.
When
for these
can
pets.
people buy land?
Yeah. There's people have been buying and selling land for a while now, kind of in anticipation and to get ready for the launch of land. We actually did a 7-day demo in December, which I think people were really excited about. That's another really important aspect to the game. There's also the kind of biological aspect to the game where we try and Axies are. They have their own genetic code, and you're able to actually breed Axies. That's part of actually what balances the economy, is that we have this breeding system, but in order to actually breed an Axie, you need to use these potions, and those potions can actually only be earned by playing the game. We don't actually sell them, right? Like a conventional or mainstream game studio might sell them themselves and try to monetize that way. But we don't sell them. And if anyone wants them, they have to get them from Uniswap or now Binance. And that's one of the things that's kind of fueled this idea of play to earn, where basically we don't step into certain markets. We leave them totally up to the players. And I think when you give players autonomy and the right to control, one of the markets around the game, and you don't force them to kind of have to do black market deals or use trusted third-party sites, where we build the marketplace ourselves. When you let them have that, a lot of really interesting behaviors begin to emerge.
So as far as the DNA and the biology, the breeding, all of this kind of has like a bit of a crypto kitties type of a vibe to it, other than obviously the pet battling construct. But the reproductive piece sounds a little bit like that.
Yeah, so CryptoKitties was a big inspiration for us. A lot of the founders of Axie, we actually met each other playing CryptoKitties. So I think one of the awesome things about what Dapper did there was they created, basically the first kind of interesting non-fungible token community. So there were a lot of people that met playing CryptoKitties that were really interested in, what does this new paradigm of ownership mean? What does the future look like? And I think Axie is partly a response to that question. And I met Trung, basically the creator of Axie, playing CryptoKitties. I met Alexander, who's also co-founder of Axie. He's our COO, playing CryptoKitties.
How fun!
And so
that's really amazing. So tell me a little bit about kind of the motivation and the origin of obviously you went back to CryptoKitties and you were all playing that. So how did this evolve from there?
Yeah, so I think one of the things that people really wanted in the early days of blockchain gaming was a fun game, something that was just beyond a pure collectible. We thought, hey, if we can make a fun game with IP that's cute and adorable, like something like Pokemon or Tamagotchi, something like the games that we grew up loving, then we'd have a real shot at introducing the world to blockchain technology. We knew that it could work because a lot of us had never been interested in actually using blockchain before we learned about non-fungible tokens, right? So we assumed that, hey, if it happened for us, it could happen for way more people. We just probably happened to be like the first generation of this. So
yeah, that's fascinating. So interested to try to understand where do you see this going? Because I think you're talking about kind of the early days. So what's the future?
Yeah, so what we're seeing is that the world is becoming increasingly digital. And I think in the future, there are going to be kind of digital nation states where people live, work, and play. And I think that, we want Axie to be one of those, to be one of these burgeoning digital nations, right? So we're already starting to see people making friends, socializing, creating businesses, while also, of course, having fun in the Axie universe, right? So we have a lot of the motivations and a lot of the things that you need, employment, social connections, fun. Now it's about, I think scaling up the experience, making it more fun, making it more accessible to everybody. Expanding upon the benefits. We see that Axie right now, play to earn works really well in certain areas of the world, Philippines, Indonesia, Venezuela. Also, Uber drivers while they're waiting for their next ride to come. People who work in retail and it's very slow, right? So I think one of the interesting things is people using Axie as a supplement to their own income while they're already working a job where they might have some extra time on their hands. Anyway, so I think it's about scaling play to earn, making the game more fun, and making the technology more accessible. So we're also, at Sky Mavis, Sky Mavis is basically the creator of Axie Infinity. One of the things that we do is actually build the infrastructure that allows blockchain games to kind of penetrate a different user profile. So someone who might not be as crypto native and familiar with the technology.
That's amazing. So tell me about kind of what do you see as being the biggest sources of friction, and how would you optimize? Like what would your dream user interaction model be?
Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, right now, very obviously, Ethereum gas has been really high, right? So, our players right now on Ethereum, they're competing with arbitrage bots, sophisticated financial institutions, for basically block space, and that's pushing up, basically the cost of playing the game really high. So I think, yeah, just basically having the, I think games are not a good fit for being on the base layer, right? So that's actually what we're building an Ethereum sidechain called Ronin, specifically for Axie Infinity. There are also, issues around wallets. There's no social login. Custody is really difficult. We're starting to see this. Actually, a lot of our players, they've never used a wallet, a digital wallet before. They often, lose their funds, they lose their private key,
Yeah,
they get scammed, they give it to someone who messages them in
totally.
the Discord.
Yep.
So it's a good sign. It's obviously very painful for these people, for when they learn, but it's actually a great lesson to learn, and I think usually with very small amounts. But it's a good sign that a new generation is coming in and making the mistakes that we all made at one point, or learning the lessons that we all did. So yeah, I think there are also a lot a lot of frictions around wallets, and yeah, but so I would say that those are the two main ones. But we do believe in basically making the benefits so high that people are banging on the door to get in, right? And so right now, I think the main issue is kind of scalability of transactions, which has been something that, yeah, has is as old as the space itself, right? Like uh, it's gas spiked in
Yep.
December 2017, when we all just found out about blockchain games as well. So.
Yeah, that's definitely a big struggle. Yeah. So, with respect to kind of like reaching out to new players and new player base, like, how do you see the growth of this? I mean, obviously, you're developing new features for usability, which I think is pretty big. Like, do you have kind of growth plans? Like, how do you see this expanding? What's the geographic footprint, and like, where do you see the next users coming from, and how many users do you have, and how many do you imagine are coming?
Yeah. So a lot of questions in there. So there are 28,000 people who own Axies. There are around 15 to 18,000 people who submit on-chain transactions each month playing Axie. So I believe we're the number one blockchain game by monthly active users, and we're one of the top applications on Ethereum in general. Like just even including basically finance applications. So yeah, what we've seen is that we have a very, when we have product market fit with a demographic, we get a very high kind of viral coefficient there, right? So right now, I believe that we have product market fit in certain areas of the world, and not so much in other areas,
So
right?
how do
So
you see that? Like, how would you say, like, which areas of the world would you say there's a fit, and and what's
mhm.
what's
Yeah,
what's to come?
so right now we're seeing a lot of, we're seeing big growth with players in the Philippines, Indonesia, Venezuela, right? Because you're able to earn kind of an hourly wage by playing Axie, which is competitive and many cases much larger than the average wage in
Amazing.
those countries. And so I think in the so yeah, so I think scaling that, and so scaling that is really important. That's why we have the governance token, where we'll all be allowing players to actually earn a piece of the universe by playing. I think it's also, yeah, getting more sponsorships involved, so that they're actually, we see ourselves as kind of a user aggregation uh, mechanism for things like DeFi, right? Where we have a proven committed community, and if they want to kind of share their products with our community, they can kind of become sponsors. So there are different ways basically to scale play to earn. I also think it's about making the game more fun. Right now, we know that the game is, people will play the game if they can earn a little bit of money. I also think it's about increasing the amount of fun, the competitiveness, um, and uh, and yeah, so I think that's really key as well.
That's interesting. Do you guys have a mindset or methodology around kind of increasing fun? Like, how do you measure it, or do you measure it at all, or how do you think about making something more fun? What? How do you think? What is fun?
Yeah, I guess that's interesting. So I think we go through internal testing, right? So a lot of our team, they're not blockchain gamers. They don't really know much about blockchain in general, especially for example, our art team. But a lot of them are gamers, right? That's why they wanted to work at a game company. So yeah, I think basically if we have non-blockchain natives trying out the game, both from within our team, our friends and family, and they're saying, and they're having a lot of fun, and the retention numbers are good, and then and they're smiling a lot. Yeah, I think that's one measure.
Well, that's good. I think those are all fair ways of looking at fun and how fun where fun comes from. So that's interesting. And how so your goal is to kind of increase the fun level so you can kind of penetrate new markets and kind of get a bigger audience, basically.
Yeah, I think it's about increasing the fun, increasing play to earn. Making the community. I think one of the reasons that people stay is as well as the community. So continuing to empower and reinforce that, and just educate. Like I think we're on the path. We're on the path. What we've seen is that growth for the first 2 years was very slow and steady, and then around July we hit this kind of exponential growth phase. So what you see is that basically slow and steady over a long enough period of time eventually goes exponential. It just the market needs to mature, the technology needs to mature, and obviously we want to be part of that trend. But some of it is just, I think, staying alive, believing, and I think good things happen.
Yeah, that's a great way of looking at it. I think that when you see, like, for example, what Rovio did with Angry Birds in traditional mobile gaming, like they were very patient and they spent like 10 years kind of building and investing in their games and their capabilities. And, then they suddenly had this kind of like overnight success that wasn't very overnight. It was just this huge hit. And, so I think
Mm.
that's exciting to hear that you're kind of like, starting to hit like the growth phase of Axie. And, it's clearly a game that a lot of like effort has been put into. It's a very attractive game, and the, game creatures are very imaginative, and, they're very appealing. So, I think that it definitely makes sense that people would want to invest here. Well, good. Let's zoom back a little bit to the bigger picture of like DeFi. So, how do you see something like Axie fitting into the sort of DeFi universe? Like, I know that like Delphi Digital is working on kind of tokenomics and governance token dynamics, and there's a bunch of really interesting DeFi elements to the Axie world. But I'd love to kind of hear your DeFi perspectives.
Yeah, so I think that Axie is a great. So when we talk about introducing blockchain and educating blockchain and educating our users about blockchain, um, I think one of the things that we're really proud to have introduced them to are some of these decentralized finance protocols. For example, Uniswap, right? Most of our users used Uniswap for the first time to, basically buy and sell small love potions, which are an in-game currency.
Yep.
And then there were a lot of people who, Uniswap did an airdrop to anyone who used the protocol
Yep.
back in September. So there were a lot of Axie players who got thousands of dollars, in some cases life-changing money, based on their locality, just for playing Axie Infinity. A lot. I think the funny thing is that a lot of our users were personally thanking us they thought that Uniswap was actually part of Axie and that we built it for the game. Um, so I think that kind of illustrates that, we are dealing with, people who have never really used these things before, and they're learning a lot. So I think Axie is a great way to get involved, to learn about these projects, and to access some of these types of financial services, basically.
Yeah, it's
And
nice.
I generally see decentralized finance as the recreation of all financial services on top of Ethereum, which by nature makes them borderless and accessible to everyone. And so yeah, I think DeFi is a really exciting trend. I think that it's unlocking, it when you merge it with blockchain games, do interesting things to liquidity, liquidity of collectibles, liquidity of in-game resources, and I think exactly, liquidity is, you can actually see adoption very correlated with the liquidity of assets in your ecosystem. For example, we didn't see product market fit until basically there existed a certain amount of liquidity for small love potions on Uniswap.
Yeah.
So in the future, it's like, I think games will look at the liquidity for their in-game resources as something to use their marketing budgets on, for example, rather than just like wasting it on Facebook ads and things like that. You're actually pouring it directly into the ecosystem, kind of as a bonus for early adopters or players to try out your game.
Yeah, liquidity, I think, is increasingly being well understood as being kind of the sort of lubricant for all financial activity, right? So I think people are really understanding that liquidity providers, should be incentivized, because that's really the life's blood of any financial system. So, I think it's fascinating to see these things all evolving in the world of DeFi.
Yeah. So also you mentioned Delphi Digital. So Delphi helped
Yep.
and helped us design the token for Axie Infinity. It's called the Axie Infinity Shards, or Axis.
Yep.
And I think the token is heavily inspired by some of the most ingenious kind of DeFi tokens out there. For example, synthetics. So with Axis, you can actually stake the token to earn rewards from the treasury. The treasury is accumulated, or is an accumulation of all the fees in the ecosystem. So there's a breeding fee, there's a 4.25% marketplace fee, and then also primary sales will accumulate in there. And there's also staking rewards, right? So basically creating some reason so that when in the future players earn this token, they won't just want to sell it on Uniswap. They'll actually want to stake it, lock it up, and then earn rewards. And then that kind of keeps them around, and I think is a far healthier mindset than just either, okay, I'm going to either use this or I'm going to sell it. And there needs to be basically an interesting mechanism around holding and depositing the token.
That's
So
fascinating. So go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh yeah, sorry. So yeah, so Delphi helped us a lot around that, and so I think also that's another way that we see DeFi's influence in Axie is through these basically experiments around token design, and how they've kind of influenced the creation of our own native token.
No, it's exciting, right? Because in essence, the governance token itself and the mechanics around it, including staking, become almost part of a dynamic metagame, right? And so in a sense, like what can happen is not only can Axie players and others kind of participate and involve themselves in the governance of the Axie ecosystem, but as well, like they can elevate that, right? That can become part of an additional mechanic that is a game that transcends the battling of Axie pets, and it becomes a completely separate game universe, right? It's the Axie governance game.
Yeah, definitely. And then, there are probably some people who will just make it their goal to accumulate as much of the token as possible by playing the game, right? And
Yep.
that harkens, or kind of it reminds us of Ready Player One, right? Where you're through the Easter egg hunt, Parsifal is on a quest to basically earn the entire game, right? That game, that is like a winner takes all game.
Yep.
Whereas, what we're doing is, yes, we're giving away more than half of the game, but it's kind of through our community, through all these different distribution mechanisms, rather than one kind of winner takes all like grand quest. I think obviously is, I think, more realistic, right?
Yeah, of course. But I like the allusion to the building of the metaverse economy. Like, we definitely see a bunch of folks kind of playing along those lines. The Animoca Brands folks, like, they're definitely thinking about this, and obviously Sandbox, and there are other environments too that are kind of adjacent, that have this kind of mentality, right? So sort of building the economy of the metaverse, right? And building this Ready Player One style of like economic, I guess you described it as a nation, right? So it's sort of a digital nation, and a digital nation that people establish citizenship at some level.
Yeah. I mean, we're already seeing, right? Even since the last time we spoke last week,
yeah,
we've seen that it's becoming, I think, increasingly a trend where people now, they're starting to lose connection to, where they might have been born, right? Or basically these forced connections, right? Like there needs to be. I think we're seeing the rise of opt-in nation states where you might feel more like an Ethereum, you might feel more closely connected to other members of the Axie community than you are to people who just happen to have been born in the same country as you, right? So I think one of the trends is that, yeah, these digital environments allow us to choose who we associate with and connect with, and basically ally ourselves with, rather than just being like our ancestors, limited to the people who happen to live close to us, which is kind of an arbitrary distinction, right?
There's some fascinating precedent for this, right? For example, if you look at the Estonia like e-passport or e-government identity project, right? You can really just very cheaply avail yourself of government identity in Estonia, and you can start to kind of avail yourself of additional government services, right? So the thing that becomes really interesting is, how do these kinds of precedents actually manifest, and how do nationalized kind of geographic governments start to kind of also play with this elasticity, right? Because I think, we're seeing a lot of fairly innovative experiments, some of which are maybe a little bit more kind of, I'd say, blatantly economic, right? Things like you can buy citizenship in certain countries for a certain amount of money, but I think
with Ethereum protocols, you're paid to become a citizen, right? At least right now, right? So they're literally with certain DeFi protocols, for example, and liquidity mining, it's kind of like a investment visa, but you're actually paid.
These are fairly radical ideas, though, and the reason why I want to suggest that is that the thing that's fascinating. So I recently was watching a video, and it was Ray Dalio, and Ray Dalio was saying that today governments are behaving more like corporations, and corporations are behaving more like governments, and I think that in a way he's pointing towards kind of a more nebulous future, and in a way it's a bit like the Ready Player One future in that it's slightly dystopia. It's a dystopic future, right? So the thing that's complex about the emerging landscape that you're describing is this kind of emergence of a meta construct, that is like a nation state, right? So one of the fascinating things that has been sort of reserved in terms of the nation state has been several things, right? I would say several things involve, so minting of a currency, right? So that was one thing that defined the existence of a sovereign, right? Which is like, if you're a sovereign, then why don't you print your own money? And it's like, well, we have, right? So that's done. That wall has been broken. But the second and third things to look for are things like the ability to levy taxes, right? That's one that you can look at and you can be like, oh, that's interesting. But the third thing that I think is really foundational to the establishment of a global sovereign is really to monopolize the use of force over a geographic territory, right? That's including things like fielding an army, right? So the reason why these types of things are kind of really interesting is that like when people start talking about things like Facebook, Facebook is working on issuing its own currency through the the Libra/DM foundation, right? So that's the idea, that they're going to create the DM currency, right? But the thing that I'm finding to be fascinating is that at some level, Facebook actually has started creating an end run around the idea of taxes. And I'll tell you why, is what's happened between Facebook and Google is in some ways that these Facebook, Google, and Twitter and other social media companies are starting to choke the air supply from the organic internet, right? They're starting to shape traffic in a way that requires users to pay them to advertise in order to have visibility on their platforms, right? So the thing that's really fascinating about that is that that's effectively taxation. It's effectively a paradigm of taxation, which is if you want to exist on the internet, aka exist, you kind of have to pay these channels in order to get visibility, because they're going to slowly choke out all of the organic visibility, right? They're because why would they allow organic visibility when people are paying them, right? So they'll always preferentially treat that visibility. But the thing that's really fascinating, that the last wall that hasn't been breached yet, is that none of these corporations has yet to field like a private military. So that's that we haven't seen that yet.
It's just probably likely, right? Is like
That's scary.
They might use it as like, oh, like we're protecting ourselves from rioters, right?
No, I mean, if you look at, I believe
people
that
are so angry at them right now. So
I believe that the personal security budget for Mark Zuckerberg is in the millions and creeping up to the tens of millions. So like, he definitely has like a significant expense around personal security. So like, obviously it's not like, doesn't serve the entire purpose of a military, a corporate military, but there's definitely some precedent. It's a very strange world, right? Obviously another precedent are organizations like what was the company formerly known as Blackwater, which is a privatized military contractors, right, that can be hired. So it's effectively like mercenary armies, so that becomes a really interesting precedent as well. I mean, these are very like super wild conversations, because we're really talking about the establishment of novel sovereigns, and the thing that I think is puzzling to a lot of people are that these decentralized open source projects are basically in a sense they're kind of purely consensual. So that's what makes them competitive, right? Is that like if you don't like what's going on there, like just leave, and if you do like it, come on over.
Yeah, I think there's something to be said about what we're seeing is more of a market farming around farming. There's a market forming around basically where you choose to kind of pay your store your capital, pay your taxes, right? And you can pay the Ethereum miners, for example.
Yeah.
You can pay the Axis holders by paying the marketplace commission. So yeah, I think it's what we're seeing is a more of a competitive market around who people identify as. And I think crypto blockchain is really the only movement against a lot of the forces in the world that people are becoming increasingly aware of, right? I had friends messaging me, not for the first time, not just like, oh, should I buy Ethereum, should I buy Bitcoin, but as saying, hey, like you guys need to create something. You need to create something that is, it's like a social network that is, that cannot be censored. And so I'm starting to get requests like that.
That's
right?
Amazing.
And that's from, people who don't really own cryptocurrencies. So I think the world is kind of waking up. The path to everyone waking up is kind of painful. And it involves a lot of strangeness.
Yeah.
Like what we've seen recently.
Yeah.
Right.
That's been difficult.
But it's just it's part of the process.
That's very fascinating. I mean, one of the things that we talked about previously was Alexander Hamilton, right? Because
Mm.
a lot of people were turned on to his story through the musical. But I think that it is great to look at the historical figure and the kind of like revolutionary aspect of the formation of this novel nation state, right? Because in a sense, like the American experiment has long been kind of focused on the idea of creating this very novel, democratic, and specially principled society, right? So that's been a really interesting thing. And the thing that's so fascinating is that we still have these kind of funnily geographic kinds of formations that involve government. But the thing that's so fascinating about the consent and the consent of the governed from a geographic perspective is, like, for example, in California, one of the recent things that we've been seeing is we've been seeing Californian citizens, particularly high net worth citizens, moving to Texas, right, where there's no income tax, right? So the thing
Mm.
that's so interesting is what we're talking about is, again, a case where there's kind of an opt-in around even things like taxation, right? Where some people are like, oh, well, I can opt out of paying income taxes in California by moving to Texas, right? So the thing that's so interesting about what you're describing is that these sort of geographic boundaries to these obligations can be potentially like mitigated, right? And there are some people who are even moving to Puerto Rico, to
Mm.
kind of
Mhm.
get escape capital gains taxes, right? So like, so there's definitely like this kind of really complex kind of world where there's machinations around establishment of monopoly around geographic nationalism, and then there's kind of this emergent kind of free flowing nomadic idea of a nation state where it's mostly just consensual, right? Where it's basically like, well, you can just establish citizenship here and participate as you like.
I think Singapore is a great example as well, right? There's no capital gains tax, and as long as you live there for 2 years, I think you can become a citizen kind of easily. So I'm very bullish on places like Singapore, that basically make it easy for anyone to become a citizen based on residency, and yeah, basically have tax incentives or lack of taxes for people coming in. And so I think that's definitely the future. Um, and yeah, we talk about Alexander Hamilton, American Revolution. I think, the American Revolution was a result of a split in what people thought the British Empire should be about. There were, basically, there were some people who thought the colonies should be, equal members
Yep.
and should be symbiotic to the British Empire, and there were some who thought that the colonies, basically believed in a more extractive method of
Yes.
uh, colonialism, where you basically use your colonies to as a form of revenue to basically offset and lower taxes on your native, native in quotes,
The
citizens, right?
central
So
authority.
yeah.
Yeah. It's fascinating, right? I mean, when we talk about the idea of a corporation that levies a private army, you kind of need to look no further than like Dutch East India Corporation, right? Which actually
Mm.
did have its own private army, right? And this again was kind of the outgrowth of this kind of mercantilism and the kind of rise of this British imperial colony, right? The imperial colonialization, ethos, right? Which ultimately resulted in the American Revolution, right? Ultimately, the American Revolution was sort of like, the end of like the King George construct in the U.S. Right? It was basically like, I no, like this, it got to be fairly extreme, right? Like it got to be rose to a level of intolerance. But I from the perspective of like our audience, like how would you get into the mindset of like a Hamilton? Like like we've all seen, many of us have seen the musical, but like how do you kind of see him as a historic figure?
Yeah, I think Hamilton was a kind of once in a generation, once in a many generation type of genius
Yeah.
who had he was a polymath, right? So he had great understanding of kind of financial systems, also warfare. He was a workaholic. Like he was amazing at writing and communicating and making deals. So yeah, I think he would have fit really well within the crypto crowd. Like he would have written like really long Twitter threads.
You mean he's like Satoshi?
Yeah, it's something of that. Something akin to that. He was not. I feel like I kind of see a Satoshi as very like, I don't know, almost like very stable and just like
not as revolutionary.
Whereas Hamilton was a little bit more like kind of a manic genius in some ways as well.
He did get into that crazy gunfight.
Yeah, he had a huge, he was very egotistical. But he's kind of actually more like the average crypto Twitter person in some ways than a Satoshi, if that makes sense.
That's hilarious. That's really funny. I do see a lot of people dueling on Twitter, and like
exactly. He would have definitely fit right in.
There are shots fired every day on Twitter, on crypto Twitter.
I think he would have been he would have been a very combative Ethereum maximalist.
I think he would have challenged Nouriel Roubini to a duel. 10 yards, pistols. Amazing. No, it's great. It's really interesting. And it's been a surprising kind of romp through this kind of extremely orthogonal and emergent kind of macro, right? Which is the emergence of these sort of novel non-geographic state actors, and obviously the thing that becomes fascinating is like typically how the emergence of kind of state sort of geographic alternative states has always been like looked at very dimly by the establishment, right? Like if you look at any of these kind of like if you look at any case in the United States, for example, where a group of people have said, well, on our land we're not actually subject to the laws of the United States, right? So as soon as any group of people on any patch of land within the continental or non-continental US makes any such declaration, you're gonna see major, like, you're gonna see a lot of men with guns, right? Like that's the result.
I think one of the key distinctions, right, is that a physical nation state can always be seized and kind of attacked with the brute force of the state, whereas a digital nation state, right, it's more it's more there's more subterfuge, right? It's easier to conceal, it's harder to attack, it's decentralized, right? It's like if you make a small island and you say that you're a nation, right? It's like you have physical centralization, and there's one single point of failure, which is the physical ground that you need to hold.
Yes.
Whereas there is nothing, with these digital nation states, that the attack vectors are much
yeah, but I think what you're really pointing at, though, is that really the battlefield for the emergence of these kinds of stable entities really becomes kind of the KYC AML phenomenon, right? I mean, I tend to be actually in favor of the agenda of reducing money laundering and terrorist financing, like all of the, I promote those, like let's stop terrorists and let's stop criminals, and so those are generally good aims. But the thing that becomes really interesting is in the context you're describing, if you can actually tie entities online to physical people at physical locations who have bodies, then the jig is kind of up, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that's one of the debates that is really important and to the future that we're going into. I mean, I'm kind of the, I think the internet is already like used for a lot of really bad things.
Yes.
But it's used for a lot of really great things. So I think yeah, I'm not so sure that I would need to see the research on what how much of an effect and how much easier blockchain makes terrorist financing and things like that. It's a good narrative for but I'm not sure about the the scientific kind of effect, the data behind it. which I think is probably almost impossible to look at, which also makes it an easy thing for certain people to kind of say is, oh yeah, we can't have that, right?
Yeah.
But we can't measure it. So.
Yeah, it's easy to say. I'm guessing that like Axie Infinity is probably not a particularly big target at the moment. I mean, it's a lot of people playing a game, so it seems unlikely that people would use it in a nefarious way. But I guess any kind of roadmap things that you can share about, like, obviously we talked about the land. I think that's exciting. The governance token, that's exciting. You're talking about more fun, which is obviously exciting. So tell me a bit about like any other roadmap items for Axie Infinity for the next year or so.
Yeah, so I think the main things to look forward to this year are the rollout of Ronin. So Ronin is our Ethereum sidechain. It's going to make playing Axie really fast, really much more fun, cheaper, and kind of more intuitive. So we actually have a test net for that live right now. We have a lot of really great validators on board, like Ubisoft, Binance, nonfungible.com, Animoca Brands, Spark. So we're really excited about Ronin. I think our community, that is, they really need it right now. I think like one of the things that I've said recently is that you're not ready for a layer 2 or a side chain until your community is really begging you for it. And I think our community is super excited for it. They're kind of yelling for it, which I think is a good sign. So I'm really excited about Ronin. Also the launch of a kind of new and upgraded battle system. We're calling that Battles V2. That is also slated for release this year. That's going to come with a kind of more intuitive battle system that's kind of faster, more skill-based, talents for more customization. Really excited about that. And I think that's also going to unleash the esports scene, right? It's like actually one of the ways also I think to measure fun is like, are there a lot of people playing competitively? Are there teams forming? And we're already starting to see that, and I think that should expand. And also, I think the people around the launch of the community treasury, staking, governance, for the Axis token, I think people are going to be really surprised and delighted by the simplicity and kind of force of that system. It's one thing to read about it on paper and go through the things that Delphi has designed, and it's another to kind of interact with it and on a front end. So I'm really excited about that. And then land, I think we'll also make a lot of progress on this year, and that might be something that we don't end up releasing to the public in a big way until at least like late in the year or next year.
It's kind of fascinating to talk about your layer 2 in the context of this previous conversation we had about taxation, right? Because one of the fascinating things that we're seeing in the Ethereum blockchain is, because of congestion, you're seeing kind of a pretty radical increase in gas prices, right? So, the thing that's fascinating when you look at an Axie player, especially like a play to earn player, if they're starting to pay like hundreds of dollars worth of like Ethereum gas fees in order to kind of get simple transactions done on Uniswap, etc., right, that the pain gets really high. So the thing that's so interesting about what you're talking about is, it's sort of, there's something kind of Brexit like about like launching a layer 2, right? There's sort of this feeling of like, well, we're gonna have our own land, and we're gonna have more capacity over here, and everyone can come to this new land and enjoy lower taxes or whatever. It sort of has that kind of vibe to it now that you talked about it.
You can see them. You can kind of see these side chains, layer 2s, as kind of colonies.
Yep.
Right? It's colonies, Ethereum colonies, and you still pay something to the home country
in order to have. But the thing that's nice about it is that they become kind of sovereigns. And they have their own power base in the sense that, like, what you're paying for is you're paying for visits back to your home country, right, as opposed to paying for activity that's in the new world, right? The new world is very cheap, and the resources are abundant.
Also, you need to. I think another kind of analogy too, is that you need to already have some people who are ready willing to go over and want to go over, right? It's like kind of settling a new land.
Totally agree. That's a
Right, you
beautiful
can't just, I
metaphor.
don't think it's going to be very difficult to launch like purely on, if to launch a new application on a side chain or a layer two, probably harder on your own side chain. For
Totally
example,
agree. Totally agree.
I think the model is still, to launch on Ethereum, get, a core community that understands the vision and is excited about it. And then when you're ready to migrate at the right time.
I guess the thing that this makes me think of is it makes me think of what Elon Musk said the other day, which is he said that the Mars colony of SpaceX will not be subject to any nation's terrestrial laws, all right, which was just kind of like this declaration of preemptive declaration of space independence, right? Like it was just this kind of like, whoa, like it's very head bending, right? Because it's sort of like, oh, well, so that's not actually going to be the United States, or it's not actually going to be like, it's not going to be anything. It's just going to
It
be
might be Ethereum's like
SpaceX
physical.
on Mars, right? That's all it's gonna be, It's but which brings you back to kind of like the Blade Runner blimp that's kind of extolling a new life awaits you in the off-world colonies, right? That sort of has that vibe of like populating a new space, like moving into a new domain and following new rules.
Definitely.
Fascinating conversation and a great rollick through like the existence of geographic sovereigns and the monopoly on the use of force, and just a fascinating kind of set of core principles and a great lens through which to see this kind of remarkable emergent product in Axie, and a great really interesting experiment. So thanks for sharing.
Yeah, thanks so much for inviting me, Miko. Yeah, it was a lot of fun. Yeah, we got into a lot of kind of things that I don't
Ha,
typically discuss on podcasts. So it's awesome.
fantastic. Thanks so much.